Okay, picture this. You've got a convicted murderer and rapist, someone who used to be a police chief, actually. Some sources even called him the devil in the Ozarks. He's serving decades.
Right. Long sentences.
And he doesn't, blast his way out, doesn't dig a tunnel, doesn't go over the wall. He just walks out.
Walks right out the front door. And he does it by putting on some kind of makeshift uniform, pretending to be a corrections officer.
Yeah, the sheer audacity of that. That's what kicked off this massive manhunt. Involved tons of agencies, lasted nearly 2 weeks, really gripped parts of Arkansas.
It really did.
So this is the deep dive. We've gone through a whole stack of sources. You shared news reports, official statements, analysis, and we're going to unpack this pretty incredible story.
Exactly. Our goal today is really to walk you through the key bits from all that information. How Grant Hardin escaped the North Central Unit in Arkansas, the huge search that followed, where they finally caught him, which is surprising in itself and, what this whole thing tells us.
And just to set the stage so you understand the stakes here, let's quickly talk about who Grant Hardin is. The sources are really clear. This guy is extremely dangerous.
No question.
He was serving serious time, 30 years for first-degree murder, plus 2 consecutive 25-year sentences for rape. He actually pleaded guilty to all of it.
Right. The murder was more recent, 2017, but the rapes went way back to 97. DNA finally linked him years later.
What makes it all even more complex and, relevant to how he escaped is his background. He wasn't just anyone. He was the former police chief in Gateway, Arkansas. He had been locked up since 2017.
And that history, that sort of insider knowledge, that becomes really important when you look at how he got out. This wasn't, a spur-of-the-moment thing.
Exactly. Okay, so the escape itself, the sources narrow it down pretty well. Happened in the afternoon between about 2:55 and 3:40 p.m. That was Sunday, May 25th, 2025.
At the North Central Unit, which is in Calico Rock, Arkansas.
And like you said at the start, the method is what's so striking here. It wasn't breaking through a wall. It was getting around the rules.
Yeah.
Deception.
Pure impersonation. The sources keep saying he got out by impersonating a law enforcement official, a corrections officer specifically. In dress and manner, I think was the phrase used.
The disguise was key. He had on what they called a makeshift outfit designed to mimic law enforcement. Oh. Or a makeshift law enforcement uniform.
Right. And crucially, the sources point out he was not wearing a standard-issue Department of Corrections uniform, and all the official gear inside the prison uniforms, badges, all accounted for.
So he didn't steal official stuff from inside.
Doesn't seem like it. He cobbled something together.
And what's kind of frightening, really, based on these sources, is how well it worked. This disguise, this act, it got him through secure prison areas.
Yeah, there's one specific detail mentioned. An officer up in a guard tower actually opened a secure gate for him, let him walk right out of the main area.
Wow.
And apparently, cameras caught him leaving through the sally port, that secure sort of entry and exit track system prisons have.
The prison system itself, the Arkansas DOC, they called the failure to check his ID before letting him leave a lapse. That's their word.
A pretty significant lapse, you'd have to say.
Absolutely. They immediately started an investigation, trying to figure out exactly how it happened, and launched this big security review of the whole facility, which, makes sense. But you read that and just think, how does a high-profile, dangerous inmate just fool everyone?
And this is where, looking at the sources, his background seems so relevant. Being a former police chief, having all that law enforcement experience.
They probably gave him a huge advantage.
Almost certainly. Think about it. Understanding uniforms, knowing procedures, maybe shift patterns, security protocols, and maybe most importantly, having the confidence, the nerve to just act the part right under the noses of the actual officers.
Like he knew how to blend in, how to act like he belonged there.
Exactly. Yeah, the sources really suggest this was calculated. He used that old insider knowledge maybe against the system itself. It shows how, procedural security can be just as vulnerable as a physical wall if someone can pull off a deception like that.
So once he's out, the alarm goes up. And the response was immediate and massive. This wasn't just a local thing. We're talking a huge manhunt, nearly 2 weeks long.
Hundreds of officers involved. Local, state, federal agencies all pouring in resources.
Director Dexter Payne of the Division of Correction called it a great joint operation right from the start, and the list of agencies involved is pretty extensive.
Yeah, you had Arkansas State Police, U.S. Marshals, the FBI, even U.S. Border Patrol, Game and Fish Commission folks.
Plus all the local sheriff's departments, city police, and the DOC's own people. A really unified effort.
And the resources they threw out, everything. Tracking dogs, bloodhounds were mentioned specifically, officers on horseback for the rough terrain.
Drones for eyes in the sky, helicopters when the weather was okay, which wasn't always, and constant vehicle checkpoints near the prison. Stopping cars, asking questions.
But it was tough going. That part of the Ozarks, where the prison is, it's notoriously rugged terrain.
Steep hills, thick woods, really rocky ground.
And on top of that, the sources mentioned the weather was a huge problem. Heavy rain, which, just complicates everything.
Yeah. Washes away scent trails the dogs need, makes the ground dangerous for the search teams.
So as days turned into a week, then nearly 2, there were lots of reported sightings, leads coming in from different counties in Arkansas, even some suggestion he might have crossed into Missouri.
And the agencies, they had to check every single one out, right?
Yep.
Even if most turned out to be nothing. That stretches resources thin.
Absolutely. To try and get better tips, the FBI and the U.S. Marshals put up a combined reward, $25,000 for information that led to his capture.
Trying to incentivize someone to come forward with real information.
And one interesting point the sources highlight is bringing in specialized help, an elite team from the U.S. Border Patrol called MORTAC.
BORTAC.
Yeah, Border Patrol Tactical Team. They came up from the Rio Grande Valley. These guys are highly trained for tough environments. Sources say they brought advanced search capabilities and were instrumental in tracking and apprehending Hardin.
So their expertise in that kind of difficult terrain was really valuable.
Seems like it. Especially when the search dragged on and got complicated. It shows the level of resources needed sometimes.
And finally, after almost 2 weeks of this massive effort, they got him.
Yep. Friday, June 6th, 2025. Happened shortly after 3 p.m. Central Time. Slight variations in the exact minute reported, but basically mid-afternoon.
And the location, this is what gets me based on the sources, after all that searching across such a wide area, where did they find him?
Near Moccasin Creek in Ozarks County. Which sounds remote, but the kicker is, it was only about 1.5 miles from the prison he escaped from.
1.5 miles, after almost 2 weeks on the run.
I know. Sources say west, northwest, or north of the prison, but the main point is incredibly close. He hadn't actually gotten very far at all.
So how did they finally pinpoint him there?
It was the tracking dogs again, fittingly. They were working that specific area, picked up a scent, and led the officers right to him pretty quickly after that.
Did he resist?
Sources say he tried to run briefly when he saw them, but he was cornered. They tackled him pretty quickly. One official suggested he probably just didn't have any energy left in him by that point.
Understandable after nearly 2 weeks out there.
Yeah, and they confirmed his identity right away with fingerprinting.
You mentioned the weather being bad earlier, the rain. Did that play a role in where he was found?
It seems like it might have. The sources mention high water levels near that Moccasin Creek area. That might have actually limited his ability to move further away, kind of hemmed him in.
So the terrain and weather that made searching hard might have also helped contain him in a way.
Possibly. Search teams had apparently been near that area before, but the high water had made it impossible to search the creek bed thoroughly until later.
Once he was caught, the relief from officials was pretty palpable in the reports.
Oh, yeah. Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders issued a statement relieved that this violent criminal Grant Hardin is back in custody. And she specifically thanked the Trump administration and Secretary Kristi Noem for sending that Border Patrol BORTAC team, highlighting their role.
Which shows how significant their contribution was seen to be.
Definitely. And other officials, like Corrections Secretary Lindsay Wallace, Board of Corrections Chairman Benny Magnus, Director Dexter Payne, they all put out statements praising the hard work, the sacrifice, calling it an indispensable joint effort by all the agencies.
The local sheriff in Ozarks County also thanked the community for their support during the whole ordeal.
And you also saw statements reflecting the relief felt by victims' families, like the sister of James Appleton, the man Hardin murdered. Understandable fear turned into relief.
And they didn't take him back to the same prison.
Yeah. No, absolutely not. The sources confirm he was immediately transferred to the Varner Supermax unit down in Gould, Arkansas. That's one of the state's highest security facilities.
Okay, so let's bring this all back together for you listening.
Uh-huh.
What are the main things to take away from this whole saga, based on these sources?
Well, first, for Hardin himself, there are new consequences. He's facing escape charges locally in Ozarks County, plus federal charges for unlawful flight, on top of the decades he was already serving.
And authorities plan to interview him, right? To try and get the full story.
Yeah, they want details on how exactly he pulled off the escape, what he did while he was out, if anyone helped him on the outside. And that big security review at the North Central Unit, that's still ongoing.
But the biggest immediate outcome, clearly, is public safety. Officials stress this: a very dangerous person is back behind bars, the tread is over.
Right. And looking at the whole event, the sources really highlight a few things. First, obviously, the seriousness of Hardin's original crimes. Second, it's actually a pretty powerful example of how a massive, coordinated, multi-agency manhunt can work, even under really tough conditions.
Bringing together all those different resources, federal, state, local, paid off.
It did. But third, and maybe the most significant point, is what his escape says about prison security, particularly those procedures around identity checks, access points.
How could someone just impersonate their way out?
Exactly. It throws a spotlight on potential vulnerabilities, especially when you have an inmate who might have specialized knowledge, like Hardin's past in law enforcement. How that knowledge could potentially exploit human factors or gaps in procedure, even bypassing strong physical security.
So, looking back at everything from the sources, you have this calculated escape by impersonation, this huge search effort across difficult terrain, battling bad weather, and then the capture, almost anticlimactically close to where it all started.
Which really leaves us with a pretty significant question to think about, doesn't it? Based on everything we've gone through here. Given Grant Hardin's specific background, being a former law enforcement officer himself, how much does his successful escape by pretending to be an officer highlight a specific kind of vulnerability? The risk that insider knowledge, even old knowledge, could be used to get around the very systems designed to keep people like him locked up.
It's definitely a critical question this whole incident raises. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.